Now that we have reviewed the coordinate system, we're going to take a look at what is called the distance formula. The distance formula can be used to find the distance between 2 points. For example, if I wanted to know the distance between -3, 5 and 7, -1, I could use the distance formula. I also can use the distance formula if I'm asked to find the length of the line segment that connects the 2 points. So for our example, if I wanted to know the length of the blue line, I could use the distance formula. So we're going to go ahead and take a look at this particular example. We have a formula that we can use to find the distance between 2 points. So that formula, you can see it on the slide. That formula is d for distance is equal to the square root. We're going to take the difference between the two x's and we're going to square it. And we're going to add to that the difference between the two y's and we're going to square that. So let's take a look at our 2 points. So one of our points, and it doesn't really matter which one I start with, one of my points is the point -3, +5. Now I'm going to designate this as my first point, and we know that all points have an x and a y, and so I'm going to label this -3 as x1 and this +5 as y1. It's my first point, so it's my first x and my first y. My other point is the point 7, -1. And so since this is going to be my second point, it's going to contain the second x, so x2, and the second y, so y2. And I always encourage my students to label the points because the distance formula, the most common mistake is that students put the wrong number in the wrong spot. And so if you will take a second and label your points, that reduces the chance of making a mistake. So when I look at my distance formula, the first place that I need to plug in is for x2. So in place of this x2, I'm going to put a 7 because remember that we've already said that x2 is 7. In place of the x1, I'm going to put a -3 because x1 is -3. In place of the y2, I'm going to put a -1. And in place of the y1, I'm going to put a 5. And then we're going to work at simplifying. So remember that we're going to always do our parentheses first. So 7 minus -3. Feel free to use your calculator here if you need to. It's the same thing as 7 plus 3. So that's going to give me a 10. And we've still got the squared on it. -1 minus 5, again, if you need your calculator, that's fine. That's going to give me a -6 squared. Exponents come next. So 10 squared is 100. -6 squared is 36. And then we'll do our addition underneath. So 100 plus 36 is 136. So in terms of writing your answer, you either want to reduce this square root down to its lowest form or write it as a decimal, depending on how the question is asked, how you are asked to give your answer. So if I'm going to give it as a decimal, I'm going to type it in my calculator. And I see that this is 11.66. All right, rounding that to 2 decimal places. All right, or what I can do with this square root of 136 is rewrite it as 4 times 34. 4 times 34 is the same thing as 136. Then I can break that square root up over those two numbers. The square root of 4, I know that that's 2. And the square root of 34, I can't do anything with, and so I'll leave it underneath the radical. So we can either write our answer as 11.66, or we can write our answer as 2 on the square root of 34. All right, so we want to look at one additional example. Our problem says to find the distance between the 2 points, -9, 2 and 5, 1. So again, I'm going to start by writing my distance formula. I'm just going to copy it down. Remember the difference between the x's added to the difference between the y's, and each of those quantities is squared. And then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to label those points. So here's our first point, -9, 2. So this is going to be x1 and y1. Our second point, the 5 will be x2 and the 1 will be y2. Now we're ready to plug in. So in place of the x2, I'm going to be putting a 5. In place of the x1, I'm going to put a -9. In place of the y2, I'm going to put a 1. And in place of the y1, I'm going to put a 2. All right, so let's simplify. So again, we're going to do inside the parentheses first. So 5 minus a -9, 5 plus 9 is 14 squared. And 1 minus 2 is going to be a -1 squared. All right, so we'll do our squares. So 14 squared is 196. And -1 squared is just going to be 1. So our distance is going to be the square root of 197, which does not reduce in terms of the square root, but I can write it as a decimal if I would like. So I could write my answer as the square root of 197, or I could write it as 14.04 if I'm going to 2 decimal places.